So now we're going to transition from you being mostly listening to actually having something that's much more interactive, and it's sort of the third prong of this evening. And basically, we're going to run some breakout sessions where you all can converse, ideate, brainstorm, and come back to us at the end with some insights. So what we've done, and for the speakers, feel free to edit and wordsmith this a little bit, but we've been working over the course of the evening, the designers in the back, big thanks to you guys as well, on synthesizing the key question, that third question, for each of the speakers. So you all can see them here, but I'll just go through them. So we've got John, how do we find the will in our current political climate to think big thoughts, really bold, particularly with regards to policy, when it comes to the future of work and the future of workers? We've got Sarah, how do we optimize the hybridization of the workforce? And hybridization can mean many things here, both for employers or people engaging workers and for workers themselves. We've got Paul, what kind of economy, so looking at the meta, the macro economy, and I think we can say here, what kind of capitalism do we want to build in a world increasingly automated by automation and robots? And Vivian, how do we help workers become lifelong learners from an early age? And again, speakers, feel free to expand or contract as need be. Next, we've got Tim. How do we navigate the allocation of value between platforms and the people who work for them? We've got Kristen. What are the mechanisms we can use to provide stability for people in a world where work is more independently driven, so this tension between stability and flexibility? Donnie, what work-related policies should we ask innovative governors and mayors, so looking at this from a policy perspective, but also a place-based perspective, to pilot around the future of workers? And Jerry, what do employers need to do to best hire and manage independent workforces? So next slide, please. Okay, there's a recap. So what we're going to do is ask all of you to self-select. Which of these questions interests you most? Now, there is a request that we have as the organizing team. Please self-select into groups that are roughly similarly sized. You know, if there's a whole bunch of people, kindly don't join the place that has no seats. Go find another group. We're all adults, you can figure it out. But self-select so that we have a critical mass for each one. We're going to do these in zones, and we've sort of picked this at random, if you will. So if you're interested in John's group, speakers be paying attention as well, I don't know that you know this. John's group's going to be here. Sarah's group's going to be here. Paul's group's going to be here. Vivian's group's going to be in the back corner, back there. Tim's group's going to be here, back, in the back. Am I getting all? Did I get everybody? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, good. Kristen is going to be here on the left-hand side of this breakout room back there. Donnie is going to be on the right-hand side, so in this room there will be 2 groups. And Jerry's group is going to be back here with the brightly colored couches. So we're going to break out for about 20 minutes of discussion. And at the end, we're going to come back and do a brief report back. And what we would like for you all to focus on is the question at large, and by all means brainstorm as much as you can, but if possible to distill, to help address your question, what is one thing that could be done tomorrow, and what would it be? facilitator of each group, the panelists from each group and each question, to share in 1 minute or less, since we're all about trying to stick to time, what you discussed. But again, if there's one thing that you could do today, tomorrow, to address the question that you posed, what would it be? So I'm just going to go in order. So John.
Uh-oh.
Here we go.
He's sharing his answer.
Courtney.
Actually, go.
There we go. That's okay.
It's not
John,
working.
you have one.
I
I know both of you.
first.
Okay.
That's so uncool.
I said, random.
Is this like alphabetical?
Top down. So yes, come over here. So if you could please,
man.
summarize 1 minute or less, not hard. What you talked about and what's one.
Well, that would assume that you actually have something to say. So we had a very robust dialogue with no answers. What was my question again? The will in our current political climate, I think probably the most cogent one was we should encourage our children to get into politics because we're on, we couldn't possibly run. We've all done too many terrible things. But because we kind of worked backwards from, political will comes obviously from people and from organizations and groups. And another idea we had was we need to identify and celebrate the prophets, PH, not F, who inevitably come before great change. And the idea was John Brown before Abraham Lincoln. And we should identify those people and amplify their voices. That's definitely what I'm trying to do at NUCO, and I think we could all do more of that. But I guess get into politics is as lame, and if we had another 5 minutes, I'm sure.
It's actually super relevant. Thank you, John. And that sense, though, of whatever political engagement means to you doesn't mean necessarily running for office. So, Sarah, next over to you. How was your group?
It was good. We had a conversation about the hybridization of jobs and how to kind of optimize it. I think one of the acknowledgments I thought was really compelling was that one of our participants said that experts tend to underestimate how long hybridization exists. So that, and I've had that experience in when I talk about the future of work and AI and robotics and machine learning or and ML, and how quickly this is all going to happen, but really it's about when is it going to become the norm. And although you can say that it's already happening now, sure, but how long is it going to take? And so I think that hybridization phase was something we really looked at both from an education standpoint and looking at dual education modules and how can we get people really kind of engaged from this new workforce from a younger age. We also talked a little bit about the challenges of the IP having to do with hybridization, and so freelance and kind of how that transfers in the freelancers taking them to different companies, the IP issues, and that's something that's going to have to be really dealt with. We had a good conversation also about skills gaps and apprenticeships, the dual education. There's a lot that has to happen. Yeah.
But it sounds like dual tracks around education as it relates to hybridization, and then IP of looking at whether it's development of new expectations, norms, and templates, or, sort of invest resources and time in that.
And companies paying attention and formalizing it.
Okay, thank you. All right, thanks, Sarah. Next, Paul.
So actually, my job got outsourced, and our group of named Nancy Murphy as our rapporteur.
Okay, Nancy, can you come? Excellent. So we have audience participation.
Great delegation, Paul.
And I think you need to stand.
So we decided that universal basic income probably wasn't the solution. So if that's what you were expecting, that's not what we came to as our first move. Where we really came around to was questioning the question, which of course will come as no surprise because Paul actually said that's what we should do. But we had a really interesting conversation about a couple of things that I think have real promise. One is about how is value created? And it was a wonderful, concise definition from our designer, and I hope I get this right. Value is created when promises are made and kept and trust is established. And then we got into a conversation also about, are we talking about economy or are we talking about community? Especially in the context of a very important idea, I think, which is, can you scale empathy? And what would that look like? And how do you really understand the experiences of other people who are independent workers in very different ways than you may be an independent worker? And how do you bring into that conversation a real diversity of people that come from very different backgrounds? And it has to start with a personal effort at empathy. And if we can build empathy, if we can build trust and community, then maybe we can tackle the bigger question of what do we do with the economy.
Excellent, thank you. So trust, empathy, community as being more deliberate areas of focus and also integrated much more deliberately in what we do. Vivian.
All right, I should have been as clever as Paula to do some delegating. I didn't know that was an option, bastard. I was also a terrible moderator, so I apologize that I just talked most of the time. But I'm going to try and distill down a lot of what we've thought of, which I will try to put, whether we're talking about someone on the first day of their life or in the 80th year of their life, what we should be thinking about is how do we add value to the long scope of their life? Not how you're performing on a standardized test, not whether your skills match a job description, but are we producing people that are living happier, healthier, more productive lives, to steal the Gates Foundation's. But when I say that, I believe that we are in a regime where that isn't just philosophy, where we can actually go through and say, wow, what this student is doing right now in the classroom may have nothing to do with how they perform on a standardized test, but it is driving them towards a better life. And I don't care whether they know how to factorize a polynomial. I care that they get that life. And I think we need to take the same attitude into our workforce. I don't care whether they have the skills that match the job description, because guess what? Turns out that's not a very good predictor of the quality of their work anyways, but rather that they have the attributional qualities necessary to grow. And then my job then as an employer, as it has been several times, is to add value into that life so that I didn't just reap the benefit that comes out of it. So in some ways we're mirroring the transforming the discussion from an economy to a community. We're mirroring that here. And instead of talking about a worker, we're talking about how do we add value into a life.
Excellent, thank you. And what I gather too is whether it's lifelong learning or employee or worker productivity and interest, also how do we make sure that we continue to fire people's curiosity?
Yes, as opposed to, and I'm going to be bluntly honest with this, when I have this discussion with a lot of C-suite people, their first response is, but how do I fire them? If that's the first question you have about your new employee, you are on the wrong track from day one.
Excellent. Thank you, Vivian. Okay, Tim.
I tried outsourcing and I was rejected. So first thing we talked about was how do we increase the transparency and accountability of platforms simply by what data do we need out of platforms about what they pay to their workers, how much the workers make, what's the beginning of holding companies accountable is having the data to do so, and so the need for open data was one of the things we talked about. We really talked a little bit also about, are there equivalent platforms for labor organizing? There are some things like coworker.org, the beginning to work on this. Carmen, who's here, is exploring mechanisms for workers to associate and reflect themselves. We talked a little bit about consumer choice and the way that we as customers are potentially the conscience for companies, and that we need the tools to hold them accountable. And how do we raise the profile of alternate forms of business organizations such as cooperatives? And I think there's sort of a set of companies and a set of types of business organization that have just fallen from the narrative. And could we raise that alternate narrative so that we could imagine that the economy could be organized differently than it is today?
Excellent. Thank you. One thing I find really interesting about new forms of worker organization, labor unions for the 21st century, but also getting more data, this doesn't all require public policy change. A lot of this also requires just a change in the mindset of the companies themselves. So as we think about the tension between company policy and what you and I and anybody who runs a company can do versus public policy that requires some kind of legislative reform, there's actually a whole lot that can be done today if there's the will and the visionary leadership to do so. Thank you, Tim. All right, Kristen.
So we also got to
Stand a little bit over here in the light. There you go.
Okay. I see, camera ready, right. We had a long, involved discussion about what stability actually means and what constitutes stability before we even got to the question of how you create it. And so we discussed whether or not economic security is sort of the baseline of what stability is, but for people who are working as independent workers or who are working in new forms or approaches to work, it's also the question of intermittent and volatile income, so things that aren't on a regular and predictable basis, that affects people at all levels of the economy, from very low-skilled and people not making very good money to people all the way up the income scale, and how that sort of creates a sense of instability that is potentially problematic. In addition to economic stability and sort of predictability, we thought about health stability and the importance of access to healthcare and sort of a sense of mental health in addition to physical health, and a sense of connection to community. So what we didn't end up getting to was real concrete solutions as much as we would have liked, and so I wish we had a little bit more time on that front. But we thought a lot about the ways that people and communities who are networked to one another and who have sort of a sense of community cohesion and connection to people in their communities or in their work circles or in their potentially job or family or whatever it is, that's a sense of sort of anchoring that can help promote stability. And then we, sort of similar to what Tim was saying, we got to the question of I don't think that that's something that will necessarily be driven by federal policy. That's something that'll be driven by all different kinds of actors beyond what we see today. So corporate and philanthropic supporters, community activists at the grassroots level, new forms of worker organization, new forms of sort of community or religious or purpose-driven things can all contribute to that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And also, I don't mean for this to sound trite, but also looking more local. Yep. I mean, and looking, I always like to say, like, looking at what's happening in your own backyard. Not that you're going to find the solutions there, but you are going to build some of that community connectedness and social fabric, which in turn drives some of the other kinds of stability, resilience, or if not stability. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Excellent. All right. Final stretch. Johnny, cities, mayors. There you are.
I had a venture capitalist say to me, people come out here to get ideas. And what I was reminded first from our group was that if we're going to help communities, we have to make sure we're asking the communities, whether it's the people, the workers that live there, or whether it's the business community. So that was point one. Make sure that it's not just the mayor and fancy people from here. Make sure that the community itself is having a voice in how do we make this transition. Second is connecting the jobs and skills. And the theme running through that point was simply that four-year college doesn't really do it for everybody. I mean, the truth is, less than half of Americans have a four-year college degree, which is sort of hard to imagine because probably 95% of your friends all have college degrees. But less than half of Americans have a college degree. So we want to match skills needed to skills trained through apprenticeships and internships. Third, you want to, for the workers, for the citizens, you want to lower the risk of this training. So who was it said if you want to be a software coder, you go to college for 4 years. What happens then if you decide you don't want to be a software coder? What happened to your 4 years? What happened to your sunk cost? So lowering the risk and commitment of time and money to make this transition as a worker, whether you're a new worker or the 49-year-old, is key. And the last point, which was really compelling, was there should be physical space in cities, an actual place where people can go, not where it's the center for IBM or the center for Facebook, but it's a multiple corporate center combined with government actors, local government actors, and the workforce itself.
Fascinating. Some of the anecdote on this, I've done a fair amount of work in the sharing economy, and cities are always like, what can we do to embrace it? And the number one thing is cities owned all kinds of underutilized space that's just sitting there. The number one thing that they've done successfully is also open up some of that community. You have it already. It's not costing you anything. Often you don't even know you have it. And open it up both for business development and sort of as a community ecosystem, and also open it up for whomever wants to do anything of community service. So you have mentoring, you have yoga classes, you have music lessons, and this is all in space that cities own that they simply hadn't thought had a purpose otherwise. So thank you, Donnie. And when is the mayors are coming here?
July 17th and 18th.
Okay, follow up with Donnie if you're interested in more. And last but not least, Jerry.
All right, we had a nice, small, little intimate group over there, and we actually touched on almost every single one of the previous group's themes. We talked a lot about how to create a community of independent workers within a larger organization. We talked about creating a culture that makes it comfortable for independent workers and contractors to want to go back to a larger organization and continue to have projects there, so that it makes it more equitable for larger organizations to hire independent workers and to create that culture. The first thing that's going to be paramount in making that paradigm shift is to get those top 10, 20, 30, 100 companies out there to embrace the independent worker and to create some of these I don't know, processes. I don't want to use IBM words, but sorry, it's just part of my DNA. Just to think about how to make people comfortable and to also offer something in return. It's really about the give and take of how everyone works together, whether you're part of the larger organization or an independent worker, and creating the community to change the way people get transferable skills, to learn from each other and to think about it in a way that creates that community within the larger scale.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jerry. Final round. Thanks, everyone. That was great. Pete, with no further ado.
No, I don't need that. Hey, terrific evening. Thanks so much to everybody who basically was here. Everybody contributed. And it is true, what this is the beginning of a project. It is not the end. Basically, we're going to be doing other events. We're scheduled at least for one or two in the fall. We're going to be doing virtual roundtables, or roundtables where we actually build off a lot of these questions here. I know there's that kind of surface through here to actually get more kind of engagement around these specific things. We'll be doing deeper interviews with folks, other research and things. And so we want to stay, if you want to stay connected to this project, we'd love to be. We got all your emails and we'd love to keep you connected. But through our site here, through the Twitter thing, basically this is, believe it or not, that hashtag hasn't been used, so it's pretty much a virgin hashtag. Or very few? Oh, okay. Well, at least recently there has. Oh, no, tonight. No, not tonight. No, tonight it is. But I'm saying it's funny, the history of this is really, it hasn't really had much traction in the last few years. So this is good, and so a lot of what we're doing here will come through here, and ultimately the series is here on the site. I want to leave here few last minutes. Grab a last drink if you want. You can stay here. No one's going to kick you out for a little bit. And thanks so much to everybody. What a great start to the project.